Welcome to the Hay Kings podcast, brought to you by Krone, dedicated to hay and forage producers. On today's episode, I'm joined by Cosmos Fitzpatrick. Now, Cosmos should sound familiar to you because he was on Season 5 doing a market update with us, and he's back. Welcome.
Thanks for having me again, Jon Paul. Happy to be here.
Well, we want to touch on a couple of things today, one being market updates, and then the other is the way forward for the hay industry. It's not a particularly great spot for producers right now. Let's hit the road running. You got your trading floor going in the background.
Yep, I've got behind me, I've got brokers that manage different parts of the United States. I think one thing that's unique about us is we trade the domestic market, and we just focus on the domestic market. We don't trade any export hay. We trade the East Coast, the United States, the West Coast. I'm here in New York in our main office. So we get to know, the entire United States. We operate in every single region. I think I've got customers in every single state. And a large array of customers from everything from feed stores to dairies to feedlots, ranches, a lot of ranches right now in different states across the U.S. So we've been pretty active. I think last time we spoke, it was 2023. So we probably were not as big as we are today. We grew quite a bit since then. This year we did roughly 830 loads a month. I think back then we were probably doing closer to 500. When we talked last time, loads a month, but now we're around 830. I think that's where we're going to end up. We're 2 days till the end of the new year. The market has still been active for us. We're just as busy as we were last year, this year, but we haven't necessarily seen any big spikes in demand or any big growth things like we did last year. Last year, there was a bit more drought in the U.S. There was some other factors that had led to a lot of hay moving rather quickly at certain times of the year. But this year was highlighted by a slower market. We had to really work harder to get the same amount of sales this year as we did last year.
What are some of those big drivers in demand? I mean, the headlines are around beef cows and dairy markets.
The domestic market mainly gets by two things that I look at. Drought and weather is going to affect demand the most, okay, by far. And then population of animals. Population of animals greatly affects. So there's certain things that I consider them annual changes that happen, they happen every year. For instance, the migration of horses from one part of the United States to the other part of the United States. And, with the equine industry in the United States, that happens every single winter. The horses from the Northeast move down to Florida. And for the summer homes and all the summer circuits, or the winter circuits are happening in Florida, and then they migrate back up north for the summer circuits where they're happening up here.
Same thing happens in the West, right?
Same thing happens in the West. They go down to where's Arizona and Texas.
Yep.
Yeah, more or less.
Yep, absolutely.
So you have that migration of animals. That's going to cause regular seasonal demand changes in those areas, and that's predictable. The non-predictable stuff is when weather comes into effect. So you hear things like, a drought in Texas, like there was last year and the year before, that could affect demand changes. And it depends on where those droughts are happening. If there's a drought in the middle of a desert, guess what? It's not going to affect demand very much. Right. It was a desert to start with, okay?
Right.
So there were no animals there anyway. So I think some people saw this year, New Mexico and Western Texas had a pretty extreme drought still. Well, that didn't really affect demand that much because there was not that much big population in those areas where that drought was taking place. There were ranches and things like that we're seeing a small uptick in demand from, but it's not going to be a big market mover. Like if Eastern Texas or Central Texas or the Panhandle of Texas gets in a drought, that's going to greatly affect demand because that's where there's a massive population of animals.
Right. So muted impacts from drought in 25 is what I just heard you say.
Yeah, muted impacts from drought, weather all around, even though some people in certain pockets of the market experienced drought and, still a challenge. And I know you did, John. But you guys several years on right now, right?
Yep, absolutely.
With droughts.
Yep.
In certain pockets still experience challenges with weather, but for the vast majority of the United States, it was a bumper crop. There was plenty of production for the demand that's out there. There's also decreased demand from like the export markets and things like that. That's going to push some of that hay inbound into the United States, but the vast majority of it is that was happening northern plains and in the Midwest and in the Northeast. There was plenty of production for what we have right now. There's certain things that are short in the market. Like for instance, in the Northeast, second cutting hay is really short. And why? We had a really late first cutting. It was a wet first beginning of the year. Everyone was late to getting. Some people got there was like one baling window where it was about 1 or 2 days where they were able to get out there on the fields and bale up some first cutting and nice and young. That's if they pulled the trigger early. Then if they delayed at all, then they delayed for another 6 weeks at least.
It was a long time.
And then they got out there, so they got a late first cutting. So that's what the market is full of: late first cutting. Second cutting came up really short. If anyone got any second cutting, it was a really short second cutting because it got dry toward the end of the summer.
Yeah, went from too wet to too dry real quick.
Right. But that first cutting that's out there, there's plenty in supply. We're moving through it fairly quickly. There's still plenty of it out there. Barns busted on first cutting. There wasn't much for second cutting though.
Yeah.
Looking to make a lighter footprint across your fields? Run Krone rakes. Available in working widths from 12.3 to 15.1 for single rakes and 18.8 all the way up to 62.4 feet in the twin and four rotor versions. Choose from multiple sizes and configurations to sweep across your field, gently lifting the crop into clean and boxy windrows. Ideal for the hungriest baler or chopper. Learn more at www.krone-northamerica.com.
Now, at HayCon, I talked about the shifting market boundaries, right? We're exporting 1.2 million tons less hay out of the West. That hay has to go somewhere. There wasn't a commensurate drop in production. That hay is moving east, right?
Somewhat, but I would not say any more than it has in the past. And that's contrary, that's conflicting statement, because I think that you'll hear a lot of other people say it's moving more than ever. But I think what we're seeing, what we're seeing move is someone move a couple, maybe a dozen semi-loads, back east, or someone new going out there moving it east. But I don't say it's any more than it has been in the past. Now, I'll give you a little history of maybe the past 8 years. We'll go back to 2017. 2017, 2018, 2019, hay prices were fairly low in those years in the West. And hay was moving east pretty regularly. In fact, there was a big market in the Midwest dairy markets. They were buying a lot of large square bales of hay and feeding it, and that became part of the ration. And then also in the Northeast, there was a lot of three-tied alfalfa being used. There was a lot of large square bales of alfalfa, specifically 3x3 and 3x4 alfalfa, orchard alfalfa coming from the West and getting moved back east. And they had built it into all the rations on a lot of breeding farms where they had standard bred breeding farms and things like that we were servicing back then. We were shipping a lot of that Western hay in there. 2020 to 2023 rolls around, really 2020 to 2022 comes in.
And the world changes. Yeah, the world changes. Absolutely.
And think about this as someone who's feeding hay. 3 years is a long time. I mean, can you remember exactly what you were doing 3 years ago and what your habits were 3 years ago? It's kind of hard. Your memory starts to get a little vague back then. But over 3 years of high hay prices, those people, at first the price went up and they said, okay, we'll pay the higher price. Then they said, you know what, I just can't afford this price anymore. And there were challenges here in the Northeast at that time and in the Midwest at that time. There were other challenges with the price of horses dropping and demand changing for horses. There were talks about, there being decreased. This is before Yellowstone came out, which has been like a Hail Mary save for the equine industry.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Repopularized all things Western.
Yeah, exactly. with that change in interest and things like that, it caused a lot of Northeast and Midwest people to turn off on Western hay, and you caused demand destruction. So the demand destruction that I was talking about last time we were on the podcast, I think I was talking about demand destruction as prices were surging high and we were going to cause demand destruction, which I'm surprised it happened. Well, that demand destruction was also happening domestically here. So low prices are the cure to low prices and high prices are the cure to high prices. And that's exactly what we're seeing. It's an agricultural cycle that's happened dozens and dozens of times before. Now, this one is like all agricultural cycles. It leaves remnants in the past. And what we're seeing is demand destruction. Well, cycles come back. Demand destruction is when they've moved on to an alternative that they may not come back to. Okay. And now there's new competing forces in the market. And I think that's what we're seeing now is all these new competing forces, even domestically in the market.
The alternatives to high quality Western hay has got to be high quality Eastern hay. So the quality standards are what's changing.
Yeah. It's funny. Whenever I go to the West Coast and I hear West Coast farmers talk about the story of Western hay being so superior to East Coast hay, which it is. In a way,
there's a consistency element to it.
There's a consistency. There's a couple factors that make it. But as an example here, I'd say the West Coast hay has a better appearance, and you can make it with less. I'll just say less inputs. You can make it with less inputs there on the West Coast. But on the East Coast, there was a lot of things that happened over the last 8 years. There was farms that rebuilt how they dried hay. There's a lot of hay dryers put in, and I give an example of like the Chinook hay dryer, and I use that as one example. But in Quebec, where we buy some hay out of Quebec in Ontario, Quebec has low energy prices up there, and some of the most incredible hay drying barns up there. And state of the art. I mean, and I'd really, if anyone's really interested in seeing that type of stuff, I'd advise going. Quebec has some of the best hay drying barns built in with fans that aerate through the floor, the way they dry hay. It's just a really great way to dry hay. That's not just happening in Quebec. That's happening in upstate New York. That's happening in Vermont and Maine and some of these places where they weren't able to get really good dry hay. Yep. Ohio, Michigan, some of these places where they're great hay drying operations that are producing a high quality hay that's consistent. It's something that provides that same consistency that the West was able to have. So that hay is a little bit more expensive to dry and to do all that process, but it's not as expensive as shipping.
It doesn't have the freight on it.
From the West Coast to the East Coast to it.
Now, the freight is a big story right now. It hasn't been that long since we've heard freight companies going bankrupt, right? So we have to think about a period of abnormally low freight rates too.
So back then, there were cheaper freight rates there were cheaper freight rates in different times, depending on, mainly driven by fuel prices. Okay. Supply and demand also causes extreme spikes in the market, which will really kill demand. So there were times where specifically when we're talking about the demand destruction with hay, it wasn't just that hay farmers' prices went high. There was also incredibly high freight prices across the U.S.
Yeah.
I mean, it went from, we typically pay right now, we move a lot of loads across the country. We typically pay right now, anywhere between $5,000 and $6,000 for freight from the West Coast to the East Coast. And what I mean by that is maybe Washington to Florida or Nevada to Florida or Kentucky or New York, around that $5,000 to $6,000. But at a certain point between that 2020 and 2023 area, we were paying upwards of $8,000, $9,000 on freight, which was, such a spike in price that it totally killed demand. It drove the end spike into the heart of demand.
Sure. Where do we go from here?
There's a couple of things that I'm looking at when I hear about, it's a gloomy story. And I thought that, the last couple. Well, you have a lot of great podcasts. The last couple ones, kind of outline this gloomy story of the outlook of the hay market. And I think a lot of farmers and growers are saying, hey, we're below our cost of production right now. There's a big emphasis on making sure you know your costs so you know if you're below your cost of production.
That's something that we haven't talked about. The businessy stuff is going to be the differentiator in this. But that's something that we haven't talked about in this is in that time period. Not only did we have some demand destruction, we had a variety of freight conditions, but our cost of production is markedly higher. It's way higher.
What do you think is driving that the most?
Well, it's interest rates permeating through the market. It creates increased carrying costs for every supplier that you work with. It creates increased cost of funds on the farm. I mean, interest rates. That's the thing, is when you're buying your inputs, your suppliers are carrying that inventory and they have to pay interest on it. Or if they're self-financing, there's still opportunity cost. So interest expense is real, whether you're paying it or not. That's what I think's driving most everything. And then we can get into some of those discussions around freight, around parts, because that is also a factor here. As those freight rates go up or down, that drives every bearing and every tube of grease that we use on the farm. One more thing is insurance rates, because the value of everything is increased. The cost to insure it is also increased.
Right. One of the things that I'm noticing is, okay, we have our increased cost of production here in the United States. We have a lot of new competing factors overseas. I think across the whole, all agriculture, you're finding that there's a challenge. It's not just with hay, it's the soybeans and corn and some of these other commodities as well.
It's almost everything.
Yeah, and it's driven by our decreased export global demand. And when I look at what's happening in Brazil and some of these other countries with the amount of investment that China has in Brazil and their improvements in infrastructure, I talk to a lot of farmers, and I have I'm blessed to go and visit so many farms across the United States every year. Talk to farmers and see what's happening actually at the location and what's the contrast between one farm to the other. There are some farms that are still stuck about 25 or 30 years ago in an understanding that was about 25 or 30 years old, that are saying that, hey, Brazil is, they've got great farmland, but they can't get the crop to market. They can't get it up. They don't have any roads to get it to market. They have trains, they have ports. Our ports actually rank, I think, like in the 50s in the world. We're about the 54th best ports in the world now, compared to a lot of developing countries, which are more favorable countries to ship from as it is. And they have better ports than us and better logistics than we do. Meanwhile, the last couple of years, the Mississippi River has had too low of water levels to ship barges out of, in the middle of peak soybean shipping season several years in a row now. So I would say that, our logistics is getting worse.
And it's the whole ag market. It's not just hay.
Yeah.
That's also one of the problems in agriculture, is usually there's something good that we can switch to. And that's just not the case right now. I mean, if you have cows and you manage your price risk really well with cattle, you're doing just fine. Outside of that, there's not a lot of bright spots.
Well, I want to shed some light on some bright spots that I see.
Let's hear
for our industry. So I'm an optimist. In fact, I'm an optimist so much sometimes it makes people sick. But I think that there's positives that can come out of anything. First off, there's nothing bad that's going to come out of farmers going under pressure to know their finances. In fact, knowing your finances is going to make you stronger. Going through tough times is going to make you stronger. So embrace that side of it, that, the tough times are going to make you stronger and more resilient. But that's not the total highlight here that I'm giving. Forages as a product, okay, and this is the Hay Kings podcast. Forages, in comparison to these other commodities that are also struggling right now. Corn is struggling, soybeans struggling, wheat is struggling. Corn acres will probably be the chosen commodity by a lot of row croppers across the U.S. But there's other challenges and headwinds along with that as well.
Need your hay dried down faster without leaf loss? Krone Tedders offer the best solution by getting your crop off the field faster. Available in both trailed models and drawbar hitches with the widest range of sizes. All Krone Tedders feature flotation tires and specially engineered tines to lift the crop and distribute it evenly across the swath. Less ash and greener hay? That's the Krone way. Learn more at krone-northamerica.com.
I always question the carrying cost of a corn crop. It's really expensive to put in the ground, whereas soybeans are less expensive. And we can have arguments about this kind of stuff all the time. But what's the cheapest crop to put in if you're losing money? How do you lose the least amount of money is the question that I always ask.
Well, that's probably we'll probably see people start to pencil that out, whether it's back of napkin or and you'll see it in the trends. What's the reason to plant more alfalfa, or what's the reason to market more alfalfa right now? In certain parts of the United States, there's a lot more alfalfa acres going in the ground right now, even though a lot of people are hoping that alfalfa acres will be taken out this year to control and ease the market and this and that. No, it's not. That's not exactly what's happening. In fact, I'm seeing a sharp turn in the other direction, where there's a lot more alfalfa being put in the ground right now.
And what tells you that?
Well, I see other commodities suffering, and I actually am talking to the farmers, and they're telling me that they're putting alfalfa in the ground, and to the thousands of acres, specifically in the Southwest, where they produce the highest amount of volume per acre in with those products.
Is that a conversation around fertilizer expense, being able to plant alfalfa and coast on fertilizer?
It's a combination of small factors. I would consider those small factors, and I would consider the alternative that the alternatives suck in that area.
Yeah. What's the next best option?
What's the next best option? What are we going to lose the least amount of money on? And in for instance, I'll just use this one area as an example. I don't want to go too far into each area, but in Imperial Valley, big sugar beet plant
just closed,
shut down.
Yep.
And that's causing gonna increase the amount of alfalfa acres, because sugar beets will come out, alfalfa will go in, and that's most of the people you talk to out there, that's the decision they're going to go with. Alfalfa is going to go in where those sugar beets are going in the ground. Very productive ground out there. I mean, some of the people in the Northeast and the Midwest and stuff will be shocked to hear this, but 11 tons to the acre on a third year stand, 14 tons to the acre on a first year stand of alfalfa in those areas. So they grow pretty much all year round. They take about 30 days off to let the field rest a little bit, or maybe 6 weeks, but incredible yields in that part of the country. We see alfalfa getting put in the ground. We see supply increasing in those areas, in certain areas, where other areas it may go down. So if you look at a map of the United States, there's always arrows pointing up, green arrows pointing up for increased production, and red arrows pointing down for decrease. And there'll be some areas that increase and some areas that decrease. But I am expecting overall to stay pretty flat, if not go up a little bit, from the conversations that I'm hearing in 2026. So how do we sell this alfalfa or market this alfalfa better to our customers? Well, a lot of people are saying we're going to go to the retail market. We're going to supply the equine market. Okay. The retail market, when I look at the retail market, it's the smallest of the three big consumers of hay domestically here in the United States. It's the smallest, and it's the most challenging by far. Okay. If you put up hay in small square bales, and a lot of people are going out and buying double balers, they're chambering down their 3-tie balers. If you're on the West Coast and you're producing for the export market, you're chambering them down. Yeah. And you're saying, hey, I'm gonna produce a really high quality product, and I'm gonna ship it back east, and that's where it's gonna go. Well, the standards domestically are incredibly high on that long haul hay. Now, locally, you can sell off grade hay. And when I say locally, I mean within like a 200 to 300 mile radius, you can sell that type of hay all day. It depends on if your neighbor put it up and is also trying to sell into that market, that's going to depend on how far you can ship that. But hay that's got to go to the East Coast, or it's got to go to Florida, it's got to go to Lexington. They have very high standards for that hay. No bleach on the bales. They want to buy it by the bale. They're very competitive on price. And we are noticing that there is an increased competition as well. A lot of the feed stores that we've serviced for years, we go in there and they're happy to hand us a stack of about 20 business cards that they've gotten from their most recent visitors of Western farmers that have come in there to sell them bales at a little bit cheaper of a price than we were. So when everybody rushes to the domestic market, you end up hurting the overall price of hay by driving the price down with competition. And driving the price down is not necessarily good for hay farmers, right? Being that your cost of production is also down, right? I would say that domestically, the equine market is highly sought after because it shows the highest price per ton on that forage. However, it is the margin may not be there, and a lot of people may find that the margin is not there domestically in the equine business. Now, the margin's going to be made in the things you control. And I heard TJ Steele had a presentation at HayCon And he was talking about, you got to control the things that you can control on the farm. And that's controlling your costs and trying to drive them down. I think he's 100% right. That's where you're going to find your margin, is getting nimble in your operations. And I think that even the large export companies that got a little bloated in their overhead costs and things like that, they are even finding that the only path forward as an exporter is if you have a very nimble operation. So everyone collectively is in the same boat where we're saying, hey, big companies, big bloated companies are falling quicker than ever right now. It pays to be small and nimble. It pays to not be small necessarily, but to be nimble in your operation. Your cost per ton needs to be low. Now, let's talk about the other two parts of the market, the dairy and the feedlot market. Okay, this is where I think the biggest opportunity is.
I'm excited for this because I've been having some conversations with dairymen, and they sound to me like they want to buy dry hay, but the problem is consistency. And when they switch stacks of hay, their milk production changes, and they hate that. When they switch from one pile of triticale to the next pile of triticale, the milk production doesn't change, but they're not hitting those top-end production values because good dry alfalfa milk's better, but less consistent.
Exactly. Forage is not necessarily as consistent as these other feed inputs can be.
Right.
So
I agree.
That's the big challenge that we face with forages, is that it's not as consistent, and it's going to vary depending on your conditions that you had. It's not necessarily, don't look at yourself in the mirror and say it's all me. I'm a bad farmer because I couldn't produce consistency. Most of it has to do with the weather. That's where your decisions are coming from. And I see some of the best farms in the United States, farmers that have been doing it for a long time. They run the best operations. They produce an excellent quality crop. And, Mother Nature hits them with a shower at the wrong time. And that's gonna fluctuate, when they can cut the field. The stage that the alfalfa was in when it was cut. Is it past its prime protein and it's starting to wane in protein, but it's also waning in digestibility and other factors as well. So forages, they have this challenge where it's not like grain where you can go out there and you get more consistency when you go out and harvest it, right? Getting consistency in the hay market doesn't mean there are certain things that you can control. And that's why I like TJ Steele's presentation, which was control your controllables, which I think is a great principle to have for anybody in any business. Control your controllables. And if you control your controllables and go and try to produce the best quality, meaning RFQ, highest RFQ or highest protein product out there, if you can go and produce the best quality product year in, year out, that Mother Nature will grant you, given the conditions that exist, then you've done your best. Now, let's figure out how are we going to market and sell that quality product to the market. So first off, before I get into the big end on this.
Yeah. I mean, the packaging matters.
Well, I would say I would start with this. I start with the way you take care of the soil matters.
Yep.
The way you prep the soil matters.
Yep.
Okay. Then putting it into the right package matters, and at the right moisture and the right harvest. Okay?
I mean, we have to talk about the whole suite. We have to talk about cutting at the right time of day if you're trying to make high nutritional quality. Or some of that,
or if you're going for the equine market, you want to cut in nighttime.
Yeah. We have to consider all of these things. I was being really hard on a producer the other day, teaching him about feed tests. If your ash is 10% versus 5%, well, that's 5% of that bale that's not doing anything for that animal.
In fact, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt its digestibility more, especially with a milking dairy cow. I mean,
100%.
Lactating dairy cow.
So a focus on that ash content and fiber digestibility. That's a harvest timing question. How am I doing on my list of things here? We have to look at the whole package because really discerning customers are looking at things like harvest timing to get that fiber digestibility. I've been beating the fiber digestibility. We did a great episode with Dan Putnam. Go back and listen to that one.
Oh, I love that episode. Fantastic too.
It is the right things to be looking at because
that's where it matters. Yeah,
high lignin and ash content are absolutely useless in a forage product.
One thing to consider here is we have this digestibility, that's becoming more and more relevant. But it's also something that's also more trackable these days with hay tests. Testing, I love to see, the different conversations that go on all the different pages across the social media. But hay testing is such a hot topic. Is a hay test worth anything, or is it all total garbage? It really depends on who's taking the test. Of course, it's going to depend on the lab you also send to it, and making sure that would be a prerequisite that the lab is doing a good job testing that material. But testing is becoming more and more and more prevalent right now, not just in dairy, not just in feedlots, but also in the equine market. They're looking for every bit tested for sugars, for other things like that. If testing is becoming more relevant, that means your product that you're producing no longer is a subjective product that is being sold. And what I mean by that, it's not sold by emotion. It's sold by analysis. It's no longer the trading of forages. We're now trading nutrients. And that's the way I want people to think about hay. And that's the way I think we have to start thinking as an industry entirely, is we're trading nutrients.
The pushback that I get on that is we don't want to trade hay like they trade grain. We don't want a CME contract. That'll just ruin the marketplace. And you're a hay trading company, so you make money trading hay and knowing those differences, right? And maybe you're of the same opinion that having that liquidity in the marketplace with a CME contract for alfalfa might ruin things, but that's completely missing the point. We can trade hay on nutritional content without having a CME contract.
That's the thing. Is the problem is it's not about commoditizing hay.
No,
it's about competing with these other feed inputs. And here's the big story. Dairies across the United States have cut hay largely out of the ration.
Not completely, but
and you think
close.
About not completely, but pretty close. In the Panhandle, where there's the largest density of cows.
Texas Panhandle, yep.
Texas Panhandle, yeah. Texas Panhandle has the largest density of cows. In that area, a lot of the dairies are feeding about 3 pounds per head per day. Okay. John, how many tons are going to be left here that are not getting shipped export right now? That are going to be left here? What is the export market typically doing? How many millions of tons?
I know exactly where you're going with this. So 1.4 million tons is my estimate. Is from our peak in 22 until 25, we're down 1.4 million tons in export. And you're about to take the number of cows in the Texas Panhandle and tell me that if they fed one more pound per head per day, we would make up that tonnage. Yep.
And my point is that they need to be incentivized to do that. I actually am I'm very respectful of dairy farms across the United States. A lot of the big dairy outfits as well. A lot of people, it's a very contentious subject about consolidation and things like that. But the reason that they are able to consolidate most of these dairies, and I go and visit all of them, the vast majority of these dairies, the reason there is because they are so dialed in on how they run their operation. They know their costs down to the tenth of a penny. They know how to run an operation, and they're running a very, very good business, okay? And that's how they're able to consolidate and grow their dairies, and they own maybe multiple dairies, or maybe they've built one giant dairy in an area.
You get those economies of scale where it costs the same to have a nutritionist for 10,000 cows as it does for 50,000 cows.
The nutritionist is deciding a lot of times what they're going to feed on that farm or not, or what they're going to feed on that dairy or not. And they're going to look at the price of these other commodities that are coming in. They're going to look at the consistency of it. And right now in the Panhandle of Texas, they had a really good wheatledge crop. They've had a decent crop all around, from what they can get locally. Canola meal is pretty cheap. They're able to make high protein alfalfa cheaper than it costs to go out and buy alfalfa. And what I mean by make alfalfa is make up the same nutrients as alfalfa. Now, here's our opportunity as a hay industry. Grass-fed is a brand. Okay. Organic is a brand.
Yes.
In the United States. Okay. Organic grass-fed has a lot of science behind it that shows that it has advantages for humans to eat those types of products and consume those types of products.
Different kind of fatty acids and Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of science behind it. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not someone who I can claim to have all of the facts on that perfect. Not just about the quality of it, but the consumer preference is all that matters. The consumer preference is all that matters. And we have to think about the customers of our customers. What are their preferences moving into? And are we going to be in the game on that? Are we going to be part of the conversation on that? Or are we going to miss the boat on that conversation?
Oh, this is a fantastic question that I get to ask in my next recording coming up with the incoming president of National Hay. It's really critical. The hay industry is in a tough spot because in our domestic retail, we are dealing with the end customer. In our livestock markets and our cattle markets, that's not necessarily the case. I would actually argue that the relationship between the hay industry and the dairy industry is broken because
it is. It's fractured. I call it fractured.
Well,
okay.
and I'm gonna couch this a little bit different. I think the relationship is fundamentally broken because the nutritionists are making the feeding decisions and the dairymen are making the purchasing decisions. So the hay industry has to sell to both.
We do.
And that's different than any other customer base that any industry has. That is completely different.
So here's where the optimism comes in. Domestic demand for milk, okay, has been flat, if not a little bit down over a period of time, okay, for some time now. However, milk is no longer milk.
Right.
Beef is no longer beef. There are many different fragments within there. Some of the fastest growing brands of beverages in the United States right now are milk brands. Fairlife Milk is one of the fastest growing brands in the United States. And I use that as an example. There's a lot of other milk brands along this same type of ultra filtered milk.
Yep.
That are growing brands. And really, it shows a consumer preference. Another type of an example of a section of milk that's doing really well is milk that's A2 protein. So those cows.
It's a different protein structure. Yep.
It's a different protein structure, and it's essentially it's more digestible for people that can't digest lactose. And a lot of people struggle to digest lactose. That's the consumer preference, is that they're preferring those types of brands and they're consuming more of it. Organic milk as well. A lot of organic milk is being purchased in households, and that has overall within milk markets right now, there's different types of brands of milk that are dropping in demand greatly because consumers are switching over to other brands of milk. So there's some consumption of brands within the milk market that existed already. And then there's an emerging new customer that's coming back to milk right now. As an example, a lot of people, I'm sure I got one even for one of my siblings, got an ice cream maker in their home. And you get these little ice cream makers that are going into people's homes, and you could freeze your ice cream. And we could take what I like to do is I take 2 scoops of protein and mix it with my Fairlife low-fat milk and mix it up, and I throw it in the freezer and freeze it overnight. And then I pretty much have a protein shake in the form of an ice cream, and it tastes like ice cream, and it's absolutely delicious. Well, now I'm consuming more milk this year than I've ever done in the past, mainly because I have one, a lactose-free milk. Otherwise, it wouldn't be that enjoyable to drink for me. And 2, I could have it in my favorite form, ice cream. And it's meeting my macro content. Now, I consider myself, I'm a millennial, and there's a lot of other younger generation people like that are thinking more health consciously than ever. They want to hit their macros. And this brings up the other side of the conversation about the health conscious consumer of the future. They're making decisions. And I always like to think about, how is the consumer making that decision? Even for the retail market in hay, when it goes to an equestrian facility or something like that, I like to think about, how is that barn manager making that decision? Is it a nutritionist that's making that decision for them, or how is that decision getting made? Now, the nutritionist makes certain decisions on the farm, but the dairyman makes other decisions. Like you were just saying, the dairyman's doing the purchasing, the nutritionist makes other decisions. Well, the dairyman also gives the nutritionist a directive, and that's how the business is structured. That's, where is my milk going to be processed? Is it going to be processed to be turned into, is it A2 protein milk? Or is it going to a facility that's going to turn it into ultra filtered? Is it getting turned into cottage cheese? By the way, cottage cheese right now, you cannot make enough cottage cheese to supply how much demand it's in right now.
That's good to hear.
And so there's certain dairy products that are winning. There's other dairy products that are losing in the market. And it depends on who the processor is, what their process is, what the end product is, and is that product something that is health conscious? I'll give another example here. One of the biggest selling products this Christmas season was wearable technology. Wearable technology was up over 1,000%. And what I mean by that is things like smartwatches, Oura rings. People are getting Oura rings for their loved ones. Now, an Oura ring or a smartwatch, what it does is it might track you. And let's get, I'm just going to dismiss any of the they're tracking everything about you and they're going to take everything from you. But let's think about it's tracking your cortisol levels or your stress levels throughout the day. It's tracking your heart rate. It's tracking things that make you feel a certain way. And it's telling people, and really what this is largely, what the science and what the data right now is showing us is that it's changing the way people behave because they're getting insights. Oh, you know what? After I ate that donut, my cortisol levels spiked, or I got really drowsy and it's showing my heart rate dropped off because it's showing you and sending you notifications and telling you those types of insights. Well, okay, what does this have to do with the hay market? It's the consumer's preference is changing. And we sit in the driver's seat on this. Forages are not just nutrients. They're nutrients packaged together in a digestible form. That's some of the best type of nutrients to feed an animal. And consumers are making more health conscious choices. I think that we need to be telling the story more out there that grass-fed is better. Grass-fed is better. Now, is tastier? Yeah, I don't know, but it's better for you. We can sell that story.
One of my favorite factoids is that alfalfa counts as grass-fed.
It does, I know, and it's not
a grass.
Yeah, it's a legume.
Corn that is a grass doesn't count as grass-fed, but alfalfa that's not a grass does count as grass-fed.
Yes. Which is I think of them from my job. Our job here in our company and why we've become successful is our job. We're simplified down to three things. I simplified it down to three things, and that's what helped us explode. We do marketing, sales, and logistics for hay, and we move hay to market. And I have to think, how are we going to market hay into the future? We have a great product. It's not like we have a terrible product to market and sell. We have the best product to market and sell to the domestic market. And we have a large market to sell it to that has the potential. It's a great potential market. And this is the last thing on my optimism of the future. In the late 1980s and 1990s, Coca-Cola got a new CEO. I forget what his name was right now, but Coca-Cola got a new CEO, and they began this campaign that talked about, before then, it was Coca-Cola versus Pepsi on everything. And there was ads in every magazine that said, it's either Coke or it's Pepsi, and the Coca-Cola ads would make fun of Pepsi and Pepsi would make fun of Coca-Cola. Well, the new CEO came in. I want to say it was like Gerald or Gerard. Anyway, he came in and he said, it's no longer Coca-Cola versus Pepsi. We're now playing a different game. It's share of the human beverage, the human beverage consumption on a daily basis. That's what we're competing against. And at that time, I believe Coca-Cola was selling about 4 ounces. There was about 4 ounces of Coca-Cola being drank per person consuming beverages a day. And what they were proposing is that we wanted to get that up. We wanted to double that. Instead of 4 ounces, we wanted to move it to 8 ounces. And they wanted to take share of the human stomach. And that's the way they thought about it. And what I'm talking about is we have a different animal. It's called a cow. Okay. Share of the cow's stomach. Right now, over the last 30 and 40 years, we have lost share of the cow's stomach to other inputs. And that's these alternatives like cottonseed, almond hulls, you name it. All of these different types of products that are out there, all these byproducts and waste products, all these different things that are being produced on farms, they've found them uses for them as feed inputs. And we've lost share of the cow's stomach. And that used to be made up of dry forage, and now it's being made up of those other
because they can
inputs.
Recreate it in the aggregate. This is like moneyballing one of my favorite movies.
Yes.
This is moneyballing forage, right? You can take.
Yeah, we say I could combine this and make hay, and that's what I mean by those guys in the Texas Panhandle saying I can make alfalfa cheaper than I can buy it.
Yes.
So that's what's going to set the ceiling of the market is the ability for them to buy, take their wheatledge and mix it with canola, and other inputs
And some almond hulls and cottonseed meal. Yes.
Exactly. We're saying, okay, we've lost market share to those things. Now we have to gain back that market share of the stomach. How do we do that? We promote grass-fed. Okay? That's one way of doing it. But not only that, we have to be price competitive. Right now, the way forward, what 2026 looks like is controlling your controllables, getting your costs down, and being price competitive to those other things. Then, as those dairies switch to a higher alfalfa diet, and they see the benefits of feeding alfalfa because it is a superior feed than mixing all those other things together.
When it's consistent and high quality.
Well, I'll get to that in a second. But when they achieve that, it is a superior feed, and a lot of those dairies realize, hey, we're doing better on alfalfa if it achieves all those prerequisites. A lot of farms are getting the message right now that not only do you got to be a good farmer, I just said that you got to do really good farming. You got to have, prepare your soil right. You put it in the right package. You got to bale it at the right time and the right moisture. You got to store it right in the right facility. You got to load it on the truck right. All of that's got to happen. And now you got to get on your phone and do a song and dance on TikTok and get it out there and sell it to the customer and manage relationships with customers too. And by the way, be a bookkeeper as well. Well, controlling your controllables on the farm, I think, is really important. I think that is true. We have to do all those things. And a lot of farms are out there marketing and selling their product. Is that good for that dairy? I can tell you right now, it is not. What a farm is able to do to a dairy or do for a dairy is sell them the products that they have at that moment, what they were able to put up that year, given the given circumstances. Okay. So they're not able to sell the dairy consistency. They're able to sell them what they were able to produce. And a lot of farms will say, well, I only produce a consistent premium quality hay. Sure you do. You don't.
Every cutting is a completely different product.
Even the beginning of your cutting, of a first cutting, to the end of a first cutting on a lot of these farms is different product,
Yes.
Especially as you get these large operations. So, not just from the standpoint of pushing, we're a brokerage company and we work with farmers. So I'm not just trying to push us, but I'm saying we're able to go out there and go to many different farms and we send someone to those farms to pull the analysis. We do the tests on it. We'll be happy to share. We happily share the tests back with those growers. We pull analysis on it to the dairies from the labs that the dairies want to see that analysis from. I have all the brokers get certified to do testing. They all have a certificate that they've done their certification.
This is where we send folks to foragetesting.org for the.
Yes.
There is a hay testing certification at foragetesting.org.
Grading hay, testing hay, representing it properly to farmers and those customers, because it's not about just selling the hay off the farm this year. It's about keeping that dairy consistently using hay every year and making it part of their ration. It's about growing the demand for hay overall as in a market. And that's like the great work that I feel like that's a pride in what I do. That's what we do. With dairies and equine and equestrian facilities, we want to get them on a higher quality hay, and we want them to feed less grain. Now it's the same share of stomach with horses. They're feeding lower quality Bermuda grass in a lot of places, and they're feeding a very high grain diet. Is that great for the horse? I would rather them go to a more higher quality hay and a lower grain diet, which would be better off for the horse.
Known for greater throughput even in the heaviest crops, Krone Big Backs are the world's fastest large balers. With proven bale quality and increased density over other brands, Krone Big Back balers are the right choice for optimized productivity. Talk with your local dealer to learn more about Krone machines, built for generations.
I have that conversation a lot with customers about really high quality hay, high nutritional quality hay, moderate quality, which is what most equine customers actually need. And then for those special cases, that low nutritional quality, but still dry, no contamination, packaged right, all of those things.
There's so much to know in putting up good quality hay as it is. Just with mycotoxin mitigation and all this other science that's coming out, there's so much science to keep up with alone with just producing hay. Then to go out there and market it and push it on a dairy, whether it's good or not, or it's the consistency that they want. Oftentimes as a farmer, we're thinking the hay that I put up, I need to sell it. We're not thinking about the customer's needs and what matters to that customer. And that's where we obsess over the customer's needs here. Because what we're thinking is the customer's needs need to be paramount. We need to go and search and scour the whole country to find the quality that customer needs and bring them that they need. That way they continue to buy next year and the year after and continue to keep it part of the ration. Whereas if you just go and try to satisfy your need by going and pushing your product out on the market, what you're typically going to do is you'll upset a customer. They're going to ask for a discount a lot of times, and you may lose out on the deal in the end because they're going to say, "Hey, none of this hay tested. Like you said, it was supposed to be supreme hay, and it's premium at best, maybe good and fair. A mix of that." And then they dock you later. So I hear these stories left and right all over. And when I hear that from a grower, I think in one side of my head, I say, "I'm sorry, that's terrible that happened." And I think, well, you also did it to yourself. I have customers that right now, as an example, California, we have the West Coast, in this turmoil because we have decreased demand from the export market. Well, in California, I have dairies, not even far from each other, that have different preferences right now. Some of them that only want feeder quality alfalfa, clean and green. Okay. And they're not looking for a test on it. They're looking for clean and green, fiber with nutrients.
Yeah. To go into a dry cow ration, right?
Or a dry cow ration. And they say, "Hey, I need to fill up my barn. I need 1,000 ton of dry cow hay." And I've got another one, 30 miles away that wants premium hay. Now, the ability for us to manage that many relationships across the US, I'll tell you right now, we have 20,000 active farms in our database right now, 20,000 active farms in our database that we can market your hay directly to. And I don't mean just posting it on Facebook Marketplace. I think it is funny to see all the hay out there on Facebook Marketplace. And that's one avenue, it's one tool, and it works.
Yeah, there are places
it works,
where
especially
it works.
for the local market.
Yes.
And I do think that that's a one way of marketing and selling hay. But we put it directly in, we call them up, we text them on their phone, we text them the quality. So putting that hay in front of those farms is important. And then out of that 20,000, I can tell you right now, there's about 550 active customers this year that have purchased from us. So out of 20,000 farms, there's 550. So think about the amount of, and that's how many active customers have purchased this year from us. And we're 2 days before the end of the year here, or one day really. So we're saying that, that's over a year's time, and that's going to that level. So if you're a farmer and you're trying to push your product onto the market, the amount of effort, it takes a massive amount of effort to sell all of your product to the market, especially some of these larger operations that are producing 10, 20, 30, some of them over 100,000 ton a year, that we work with. It's a massive effort to do that. So it's not going to happen just by simple, putting it on Facebook Marketplace, or selling it all to one customer.
If folks want to learn more about your business, where do they go to?
Aidenbrook.com. That's the best place to find more about us. If you want to inquire on there, we have everyone's contact information right on there. We have brokers that work in each region. So if you go on our website, you can click on which region you're located in, and you'll talk to people that are working in your region. And if you want to talk to me directly, my number's directly in there as well. On the website. So I encourage you guys to go there and learn more about us, and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn. It's in all the places. So we're out there marketing and selling hay every day.
Awesome. I really appreciate the service that you provide.
Thanks, John. Appreciate the platform you've created, and it's incredible to get the message out there.
Thank you again for joining the Hay Kings podcast. A quick shout out to Krone, our sponsor, for making all of this happen. Thank you to Nick Palmieri at Palmieri Sound for making all this wonderful audio even better. So, thank you very much and have a good day.